When photographers receive a brand new camera, one of the first impulses is to test its limits. For many, that means experimenting with high-speed shooting, exploring new autofocus modes, or testing burst rates. For me, however, there's a different ritual. Whenever a new camera enters my hands, the very first challenge I give it is to shoot long night exposures. Night photography with multi-minute exposures is one of the most demanding tests you can throw at any digital camera. The darkness pushes the autofocus system to its edge, the sensor faces enormous thermal stress, and even the most precise optics can be tested when subjects are lit only faintly by moonlight or distant city glow. So, when I received the Hasselblad X2D II, I knew exactly what to do. I mounted Hasselblad's new XCD II to 35mm e-zoom lens, packed a sturdy tripod, and headed into the Swiss mountains. My goal was to discover how this medium-format camera handled the challenges of very long exposures, some stretching beyond 10 minutes. What follows is not only a review of the results but also a detailed guide to shooting long night exposures with this camera. I'll share settings, lessons learned, potential pitfalls, and images that highlight both the strengths and the quirks of the X2D II when it's pushed into extreme territory. The Hasselblad X2D II and the new lenses. Before getting into the field experience, let's address the equipment. Hasselblad recently introduced a new designation in their X and V system lenses, E for exclusive. So far, only two lenses carry this mark: the XCD II to 35mm E and the XCD 35 to 100mm E zooms. On my test night, I worked exclusively with the 20 to 35mm E. It's an exceptional wide 2 standard zoom that suits landscape photography perfectly. Though I haven't yet published a dedicated review of this lens, my initial impression is highly positive. The design feels robust, handling is excellent, and sharpness across the focal range is superb. In the demanding context of long exposure night photography, these qualities become critical. Key settings for night exposures. When photographing at night, the camera's settings are as important as the scene itself. For the X2D II, I made some very deliberate choices. ISO and image quality. The base ISO on the X2D II has changed compared to its predecessor. On the original X2D, the base ISO was 64. The new Mark II lowers this to ISO 50. Shooting at base ISO ensures the cleanest possible signal from the sensor with the widest dynamic range and no artificial amplification. For this reason, every long exposure I made was at ISO 50. Manual mode for complete control. Night landscapes require control, so I switched the camera into full manual mode. If you leave it in aperture priority or shutter priority, exposures beyond 1 second may appear to be limited to bulb mode. On Hasselblad cameras, this is slightly misleading. Once you pass bulb, you can enter T mode and then extend exposures to multiple minutes, all selectable directly on the control wheel. This is critical knowledge. If you're new to Hasselblad's X system, you might assume exposures are capped at 1 second plus bulb mode, but in fact, the X2D II is designed for extremely long exposures. In my testing, I reached beyond 10 minutes, and the camera handled it beautifully. Focus strategy, autofocus versus manual focus. One of the most important lessons from this test was about focusing. I initially used autofocus single-shot mode, set to spot focus on distant light sources. Early in the evening, this worked well. The lens locked onto faraway points of light and gave me confirmation. However, as the night deepened and conditions became pitch black, autofocus began to fail in subtle but significant ways. The system confirmed focus, but when checked against the distance scale on the lens, it consistently placed focus just short of infinity. The result? Images that looked fine on the camera screen but were actually blurry when viewed at 100%. The solution was to switch to manual focus and carefully adjust using the focus ring. The key trick was to slowly rotate the ring until the indicator on the distance scale reached the very right-hand side, aligning exactly with infinity but not beyond. Over-rotating past infinity introduced softness again. This precision adjustment ensured tack-sharp images, even in complete darkness. For anyone shooting landscapes with the Hasselblad X system at night, this is a crucial takeaway: trust manual focus over autofocus when the light disappears. The challenge of hot pixels. Long exposures stress sensors in another way: heat buildup. The longer a sensor remains active, the warmer it gets. By the laws of physics, heat creates electrical noise, which manifests as hot pixels, bright red, green, or white specks scattered across the image. This is not a defect of the Hasselblad X2D II. It's an unavoidable reality for all digital cameras. Whether you shoot with Leica, Sony, Nikon, Fujifilm, or Hasselblad, hot pixels will appear in exposures stretching into several minutes. In my test sessions, the first few exposures showed only a handful of hot pixels. But as the evening progressed and the sensor became warmer, the problem escalated. By the time I was shooting 10-minute exposures, I was dealing with hundreds of hot pixels scattered across the frame. Yes, Lightroom and other post-processing tools allow you to manually heal or clone out these defects, but doing this for hundreds of spots on multiple images is painfully tedious. Luckily, there are smarter and more automated ways to handle hot pixels, which I will cover in a dedicated tutorial. For now, the important lesson is this: don't panic when you see hot pixels, they're normal, and they can be fixed. Sample images and analysis. First image, 128 seconds at 20 mm. First test image was a 128-second exposure at f5.6, shot at 20 mm. Straight out of camera, the scene looked almost completely black with faint traces of lights. After careful post-processing in Lightroom, however, the image revealed extraordinary detail: crisp light trails on mountain roads, illuminated farmhouses, and even star trails overhead. The before and after comparison was striking. What appeared to be an unusable dark frame turned into a rich, dramatic nightscape thanks to the X2D's 15 stops of dynamic range. Cropping it at 100% showed excellent sharpness and no visible noise thanks to ISO 50. Only a handful of hot pixels dotted the frame, a preview of what would come in later exposures. Second image, at 645 seconds at 35 mm. For the second test, I extended exposure time to 645 seconds over 10 minutes at 35 mm. This produced longer, more dramatic star trails and even greater detail in the valleys. However, with this extended time, hot pixels became more pronounced. Dozens of them appeared across the frame, particularly visible in the shadows of the mountains. Despite the hot pixels, the overall image was spectacular. The village lights glowed beautifully, fine details of fields and forests were clearly visible, and the sharpness across the frame remained outstanding. For me, this shot confirmed that the X2D II is entirely capable of extreme long exposures without breaking down, though it requires intelligent post-processing to manage hot pixels. Third image, minus 323 seconds. Heat effects visible later in the evening. I shot a 323-second exposure after the sensor had already been active for some time. This was the moment when the issue of hot pixels became impossible to ignore. Hundreds appeared across the image, and I marked them during analysis to illustrate how prevalent they had become. This demonstrated a critical practical insight. As you take more long exposures in sequence, the sensor heats up progressively, and hot pixels multiply. If you plan an evening of night shooting, you need to be prepared for this. Again, the images were far from ruined, but manual correction of each pixel would be unmanageable without better techniques. Final image, 64 seconds with moonlight. One of my favorite results of the evening was a 64-second exposure under strong moonlight. While the moon itself blew out completely, the rest of the scene was bathed in a soft, natural glow. A rustic barn in the foreground, winding light trails along mountain roads, and the texture of forests and fields all came through beautifully. Even at this shorter exposure, star trails were visible, adding a sense of motion to the sky. Once again, sharpness, micro-contrast, and overall rendering were breathtaking. Though hot pixels still appeared, they were manageable, and the final image demonstrated the X2D's ability to capture atmospheric, high-detail nightscapes with elegance. Lessons learned for long exposure night photography with the X2D. After several hours in the field, experimenting with exposures ranging from 1 minute to over 10, a clear set of lessons emerged. 1. Use ISO 50. The new base ISO delivers maximum dynamic range and the cleanest files, perfect for night exposures. 2. Shoot in manual mode. Don't be fooled by bulb mode. Continue past it to access multi-minute exposures directly via the control wheel. 3. Rely on manual focus. Autofocus may confirm lock but can subtly misplace focus short of infinity in darkness, leading to blurry results. Manual adjustment using the distance scale ensures sharpness. 4. Expect hot pixels. They are inevitable in long exposures and increase with sensor heat. Plan to address them in post. 5. Leverage post-processing. The raw files from the X2D II contain incredible detail even when they look dark out of camera. With thoughtful adjustments, they reveal stunning nightscapes. Conclusion: a camera built for the night. Hasselblad X2D II proved itself as a superb tool for long-exposure night photography. Its medium-format sensor delivered enormous dynamic range, extraordinary sharpness, and beautiful tonality even in exposures exceeding 10 minutes. The challenges I encountered: autofocus imprecision in total darkness, and hot pixels during extended use are not flaws of the camera but simply the realities of physics and digital imaging. What impressed me most was how resilient the X2D II was in such punishing conditions. Every file contained recoverable detail, the star trails were beautifully rendered, and the lens performance was impeccable. For landscape photographers who enjoy working under the stars, this is a camera that feels purpose-built. With proper technique, manual focus, careful exposure planning, and hot pixel management, the Hasselblad X2D II opens the door to breathtaking nightscapes that few other cameras can match. I'll follow up with a dedicated guide on dealing with hot pixels efficiently. But for now, I can say with confidence, the Hasselblad X2D II is not just capable of long exposures at night, it thrives in them.